Hello and welcome to Adapt with Danette FM. My name is Danette Fenton-Menzies. I'm the host of this particular podcast. We're in season 3 where we're talking about experimentation. And I would love to welcome my co-host, Jez Fenton-Menzies, or Jez FM. Welcome, Jez, to this really interesting interview with Medhi.
Yes. Well, we're very excited to be talking to friend of the show, friend of you, Danette, Dr. Mehdi Nourbakhsh, who's a great guy and has some very interesting sort of background and has done some amazing experiments, which he's going to get into in the conversation. So if you like experimentation, this is some real engineering experimentation you're going to be hearing about today. But before we get into any of that, Danette, this podcast here, the Adapt with Danette FM podcast, is actually to help people stay adaptable as times are constantly changing. And the only thing that's constant at the moment is the change. And if you want to be equipped to deal with all the change and not feel as sort of overwhelmed as it is easy to do, you can not only listen to this podcast, but this podcast is actually the companion piece to the amazing book, The Adaptable Leader by Danette Fenton-Menzies, aka Danette FM. And so what we're going to be looking at this season is not only adaptability, but experimentation, because experimentation is part of your accepts model, Danette, which is sort of a model people can use to stay adaptable. All right. Well, without further ado, Danette, I think it's time for us to jump into our segment, Adapt the News. Alrighty, everybody, welcome to Adapt the News. This is the segment where we look at a news story around the world, and Danette, you talk about how the adaptability lens of it works and how people can take away some adaptability sort of maybe lessons from this. The world is constantly changing, and there's lots of people doing interesting, changing things, and so we thought, let's share this, and you can sort of analyze it through your amazing adaptability lens. So here, let me pull this one up. Alrighty, so this one today is a story from Hubus, and it is written by Alexander Kearns of Data Dasher. And the headline is, From Experimentation to Execution, How AI is Rewiring Wealth Management Workflows. Now, this is quite interesting because if we jump through here, this is sort of how the article starts. For years, AI in private wealth was viewed as a promise, an evolving technology with distant potential. But as 2026 unfolds, a growing cohort of wealth managers are rethinking this stance. According to Kearns, the industry is at a critical juncture. We're no longer in the exploratory phase, Kearns told senior leaders from across Hong Kong's private wealth ecosystem. The question is no longer if firms will use AI, it's how they'll do it and how fast they can integrate it into real-world workflows. So really what I think was interesting about this story, and I kind of wanted to just get your take on it, Danette, is that we're seeing areas of sort of, high value areas starting to really work out how they can integrate a new and expanding technology into their industry. A little bit of experimentation, I'm sure, has gone on there, but I want to get your thoughts on this story.
Yeah. And what I love about this story, Jez, is that you can use AI, as a generalist, but you can also use it to go deep. So, thinking about the people that are providing advice to, these high-end clients and getting the best out of them while using AI as tools to be able to help actually grow their skills as well and support them to do some of the routine stuff as well. So AI can sit in a number of different places, and this is where it can be overwhelming for a lot of people. So experimentation allows us to try a few things, and we're going to talk in the conversation with Medhi. He talks about giving every employee the ability to experiment with AI to create tools and that will support them to do their job more productively, etc., so that they can value add with their intellect, etc. So this is a lovely story of getting people to think about how do we do this differently in a way that is actually working with AI, not necessarily to replace jobs, but actually to help us do better jobs and more productively.
Absolutely. I think that's the interesting thing. And to me, I think the thing that I just find fascinating about a lot of these stories is seeing how the world is changing and seeing in what directions it's moving and how people are integrating themselves with this technology.
Yes.
So anyway, kind of a fascinating story from, last week we had Irish artists. This week we're talking about, Hong Kong investment funds and just, there's adaptability all over the world and in many different ways. So it's great to see how it's being used.
Yes.
Danette, before we get into today's conversation, did you have any notes about that you wanted people to kind of keep their eyes open for the chat with Dr. Medhi?
Yeah, so yeah, I love Medhi's background. He's deep into AI, from the idea, the strategy, fully through to implementation. I encourage people to go to the Magical Learning podcast with our conversation with him as well. Um, I loved his examples, and I'll just throw in two. One was cars that actually are designing themselves through using sensors. That was 10 years ago. And I really love that reminder about whether it's 15% time or 30% time, where we're giving formal time to our employees to actually experiment. So it becomes part of their role.
I think that's a great place to leave people, Danette. Let's throw to your conversation with Dr. Medhi.
Hello and welcome to Adapt with Danette FM. I am Danette Fenton-Menzies and the host of our podcast today. We're in season 3 and we're talking about experimenting. And so I'd love to welcome our guest, Medhi. Welcome, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers.
Thank you, Danette. I'm absolutely excited to be here today. And so I'm Mehdi Nourbakhsh. I'm the CEO of a company called Yegatech in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And we help companies to start their AI journey. We help them with their AI strategy, execution plan, governance. We help them to formulate a task force and innovation teams inside their companies. And I'm really excited to talk about experimentation and innovation today.
Awesome. Thank you, Medhi. So good to see you again. And for those who haven't met Medhi before, we've also got a Magical Learning podcast with Medhi. So we'll also put a link in the information so you can watch that as well, because that was an awesome one where Medhi actually broke the mold and we did some visuals. So it's definitely worth watching on YouTube. So let's start with our first question, Medhi, which is, for you, define experimentation in terms of leadership and organizations.
Well, for me, experimentation is like a core part of how organizations can become innovative leaders. And I usually look at that through the lens of technology and innovation.
Nice. I love that. So then we'd love an example of a situation where you really saw experimentation work really well.
Maybe almost 10 years ago, I was working in my former company, and we had this idea that what if in the future cars can design themselves? So this was the idea that we had. And the idea was, we have all sensors on these cars. And remember, it was 10 years ago, IoT was the new thing. So what if, based on how people drive their cars, how people use their cars, we can start collecting data? And if we can, let's say, if all Toyota Corollas in the world can collect the data, we can really see how people are using their cars. So today's problem is that when a car is being produced, or when any design is being produced or manufactured, there is no loop between how people are using it into kind of the next version of that thing. So we had this idea that what if we can start closing the loop between design, use, and kind of the next version of the design. So to kind of put that in test, we partnered up with a company called Hackrod, and this was a company that was responsible for creating very bespoke custom cars. And they create cars for Need for Speed. They create cars for like Batman movies and things like that. So down in Hollywood. So we partner up with them, and we put sensors in one of the cars that they had. It was a car that they perfected over like 30 years. And we put sensors on the car as an experiment. They put their best stunt drivers on those cars, on that car. And then they start kind of testing it. So we took them to a desert, Mojave Desert, and they start testing the car to its limit. We actually broke the car. But what we did in a week was we start collecting tons of data. How these stunt drivers were cornering the car, left turn, right turn, all of those. And we gathered all of those data and, created an algorithm that made sense of using AI, made sense of those, and started creating a geometry that was really impossible for a human to do. So this was the experimentation that, I was part of, and it turned out really, really successful.
That sounds awesome. All right.
Absolutely.
Share with us, if you wouldn't mind, what are challenges you've seen when it comes to experimentation? And do you have any examples of where experimentation actually didn't work very well at all?
Well, when I look at the experimentation within the context of innovation in organizations, some of the challenges that exist, especially from the kind of employees aspects, because right now we are really in the era of innovation. This AI thing, what it enables all of us to do is you can tell a computer system what to do, and the computer system can do that for you. So historically, and I'm going into a different direction, but I'm gonna get back to your question in a second. Historically, a lot of companies, when they had a technological problem, they had to wait for the technology makers to solve that problem. Even though it was a small problem, they had to wait because a lot of companies didn't have that, technology power to do that. But with AI today, ChatGPT just was released last week or a week before. But with AI today, you can just tell the AI system what you want to do, what are the goals, what are the parameters, and this AI system can develop that technology for you. So what does that really mean for organization? It really means that now every person in your company can start experimenting and building small technological tools that can help them remove some of their tedious tasks in their organizations. In other words, every company in the planet now is a technology company, and every employee can start experimenting and building smaller technology tools available to them. So going back into the challenges that you mentioned, really from the organizational leaders, we need some space for that experimentation and innovation. We need to start thinking about our employees' mindsets. And by that, I mean, when we run workshops and when we deliver, keynotes, we often ask, when you think about AI, what are the emotions that comes to your mind? And we do a word cloud. 99.9% of the time, half of the people are very excited about this, and the other half are really afraid. Is AI going to take our job? Like, I don't even want to know about this because it's scary for me. So until we don't change that emotion from negative to positive, we can't enable people to, learn and experiment and do things with it. So that the emotion piece is also really important. And the last one I want to share is the mindset and creating a culture of continuous learning and creating that growth mindset in the organizations. I often, because of my background in engineering, work with organizations that have lots of engineers, and these are the people that design buildings, bridges, manufacturings and facilities and things like that. And when we talk about experimentation and the possibility of that experiment is going to fail, but you're going to learn from it, they're like, what are you talking about? Fail? There is no failure. Like, so like, hold on. So they're so conditioned to 100% success that if something is failing, it's just, it creates that, they go off track. So really helping the employees to creating that space for employees, helping them to have a growth mindset, and also helping them to basically change their emotions
Yeah.
from negative to positive.
Love that. Love that. And do you have a specific example that you dealt with where the experimenting just did not work?
Yeah, many times. I think I tend to. So I remember, like, there was a Edison who,
Yes.
as legend says, tried thousands of times until the light bulb moment that start working. I A lot of times I tend to forget.
No.
All the things that in writing my books, for instance. We wrote like 8 different drafts
Wow.
of the same book,
Yes.
and the reason I'm mentioning this is because we had a podcast with our publisher Grammar Factory this morning, and because two of us, Sam and I, wrote the book Disrupted, and we wanted this to be really helpful. We basically said, okay, let's do something new. And the new thing was, like, traditionally, a lot of people, when they co-author a book, they form a structure and they say, okay, you write this chapter, I write that chapter. And we said, okay, let's forget that. Let's write it together, and we do it in a round robin. Like, you write it, I read, and kind of edit and rewrite. So the first time we wrote this, I was like, what is this? I don't even want to take a look at it. So it may all make sense when you write it, but 2 weeks later when you read it, like, what is going on? What did I was thinking? Yeah. So, and then version 2, version 3, version 4, all of them
Yeah.
failure, but a way that could lead us to version 8 and 9. Version 8, I guess we published the version 8. But until these are like stepping stones,
Yeah.
and part of the process, and until you don't do that,
Yeah.
the good polished book that is out there won't get done. And sometimes, as leaders in the organization, you need to create that space,
Yeah.
so that people can start experimenting and learning from that, because you never know what would be the ideal outcome before going into that. And there are lots of examples of that in the past. Like 3M is a classic example of this. 3M stands for Minnesota Mining Company, or mining
I
manufacturing
didn't know
company.
that. There you go.
Yeah. So how in the hell, how in the planet, a mining company produces sticky notes?
Yeah. Post-it notes.
How's that even possible?
Yeah.
So back in the days, William McKnight in 1940s, when he was the president and CEO of the company, said we should go beyond our R&D. So we have this specific group that we call it R&D, but
Yes.
what if all the people in our company are innovators? Like,
Yeah.
how we can enable them? So he created this 15% rule, where employees can spend 15% of their time working on topics that they are so passionate about. Could be learning, doing things, whatever that you're passionate about. 15% of your time, you can work on that. And fast forward, that became the Scotch tape. They realized that in their kind of mining industry, they had these sandblasting things, and so they started learning more about the glue and the tapes, and became the Scotch tape, and then after that, the Post-it. But now, if you look at the company, which is one of the most innovative companies on the planet,
Yeah.
the 30% of their revenue comes from that, results of the 15%
Wow.
rule.
Wow.
And nobody, going into this, nobody knew that this is going to happen in the future. But these experimentations and learnings in a, unstructured and a structured way is a way to create something that you've never thought is possible. And same Google learned from that, and they created 20% rule, and Gmail came out of that experiment, and so on and so forth. There are lots of examples
Love
in
it.
that.
Mehdi, we were talking before the podcast about the chocolate. So I reckon that's a good one to share here as well.
That's a great failed experiment. And yeah, so I was for the audience, I started, so I like chocolates before going to bed, like as I'm watching an episode of my favorite series. So I bought this new chocolate from our grocery store, Trader Joe's here. And as I had it before bed, I kind of got a reverse impact that I was anticipating. And I was like, why am I waking up in the middle of the night? What is wrong with me? And as I had it as one piece before this episode, I was reading the label, I realized that each chocolate bar has 100 milligrams of caffeine. I was like, who puts caffeine in the chocolate? So that was a failed experimentation.
Thank you for sharing that one. So the next one, because I reckon there's going to be some organizations who are like, actually, we need to start doing more experimenting. So how do we allow for more experiments at work? So you've talked about the 15% rule, you've talked about the 20% rule. What other things could employers and workplaces do to support experimentation?
Yeah, so I think is part of it. So really is so in the book Disrupted, how organizations can prepare themselves for the era of AI. We talk about three aspects of that preparation. One is and it's a big one. That's why we start with this is the culture.
Yeah.
So how you as the leader should build a culture that encourages employee to experiment and to innovate. The other is the bit more like business model and how this could help you achieve bigger and brighter things in the future. And the other aspects of it is operation. But now, focusing on the culture, we talked about employees' emotion, mindset, creating that the space for innovation, celebrating failures in the organization. One of the things that I highly encourage the CEOs that we advise to do is around the incentives. How we should incentivize people that are doing the experimentation, and how should we, and the incentivizing doesn't mean that you need to increase their salary necessarily, but how you can talk about that in your monthly share out that you have for the company. How should you communicate that with the rest of the company? Are you as the leader example of a person who is doing experimentation, and how you communicate that with the rest of the organization? So incentives and communications become a really big piece on this one.
Nice. Love it. So then why is it important, do you think, for leaders and also organizations to want to adapt?
Well, adaptation is super important, especially where we are in this era, the era of AI. A classic example of this is that, like, everybody talks about Kodak and
Yes.
the company that invented the digital photography, and they went out of business because of that. But what most people don't realize is that Kodak didn't go out of the business because of the digital photography. They went out of business because they they forgot they're hiring chemists for a long time. But what happened is that the market has changed. So instead of hiring technologists that can help Kodak get to the next level, he kept hiring chemists and kept doing that for a long time. So when it got to a point that they really wanted to invest in this new technology that came out, it was too late, because their whole structure and the way of working was completely different and out of date. So in order for companies to become more resilient and innovative, they need to adapt, they need to change, they need to think about how they can bring their organizations forward. The other classic example is Netflix versus Blockbuster. But
Yeah.
what most people don't talk about is that Blockbuster actually invested in a solution very similar to Netflix. But it was so they spent $200 million on, I think it was Blockbuster One or something, digital or something. It was a service very similar to Netflix. And um, and they kind of cut their late fees, which was another $200 million. But they did it so late in the game. And what happened was that because of that, or the CEO forgot to kind of onboard everybody. So the people, brick and mortar, families who run the Blockbuster shop, they said, "Oh my God, you're going digital. We don't want this." So
Yes.
they started kind of resisting this. The big expenditure was a red flag for the board. So they start kind of negotiating salaries, and they changed the CEO. Then the next CEO came in and reverted all these changes. So the point being is that Blockbuster didn't lose because they didn't, realize that they lost because they forgot to bring in their people and the stakeholders along. And by the time they wanted to do it, it was too late. And my message to all business leaders is that as we are going into this new era of AI, a lot of people think that, oh, we've dealt with that before and it's gonna. But what most people don't realize is that going into the era of AI is like a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Yeah.
And it takes every person in your organization to change for you to really realize the full benefit of AI. It's not a tactical initiative in your company that you just delegate to the IT leaders and buy 10 licenses of Copilot and you're done. This is a transformational initiative that you need to bring to your organization. And if you don't adapt and if you don't change, uh, and if you wait, it's going to be a very painful transition in the future.
Yeah. Great examples, Mehdi. Thank you so much. So we're nearly at the end, but always love to ask this question. Is there anything else that you'd like to share around experimenting and innovation and even adaptability?
Experimenting, innovation, and adaptability. I firmly believe that companies that create that culture of innovation and start from people, ground level employees, and create that culture becomes so resilient, and will be absolutely extremely successful in the future. But the companies that, especially in this new era of technology, when things are going really, really fast,
Yes.
companies that don't have that mechanism in their organization, they're going to left behind, and they get to a point that it's too late for them to adapt, and they may go out of business.
And Mehdi, I reckon there's going to be listeners and viewers that would like to reach out and find out more about you. So where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on our website, yegatech.com, yegatech.com. And in that website, you can find the free chapters of our books that you can just download and read. There is a workbook, so each book has a workbook. So the first book is really about creating that, defining your AI strategy, forming your task force, helping the task force to move forward. The second book is specifically for CEOs and executives and board members on creating a culture of innovation, start changing your business model and operations. And both books have workbooks. So even though you don't want to buy them, it's okay. You can download the workbook and start implementing some of the ideas in the book. They had also audibles and everything. And we also have different white papers about AI and sustainability and all sorts of things that is accessible for free.
Well, Medhi, this has been another awesome conversation. And I'm thinking we need to get you and Sam back to talk about your new book, because that sounds awesome too. So can I say to you, thank you so much for joining us on Adapt with Danette FM, and to all of our listeners and our viewers, stay adaptable.
And what a great conversation with Dr. Medhi, Danette.
Yeah,
It's
was
always
awesome.
a pleasure to sort of catch up, and you can see the friendship you two have, so it's always great to hear how you two are interacting. What did you want? What were your takeaways from the chat?
I loved his phrase about this. Bringing AI is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So as leaders, we need to think this is a long-term strategy. We need to not just go, oh, that looks interesting today, and oh, shiny over there and stuff like that. Yeah, having that formal strategy. And as leaders, thinking about what is the culture we're creating around experimentation, whether it's with AI or any other thing, how do we encourage that so that it is part of who we are as an organization rather than an ad hoc to the side thing? So I loved those particular points because ultimately, in order to be long-term sustainable, it has to be part of your culture. So we have to be very deliberate about how we create that. What about you, Jez?
Well, just think with Dr. Medhi, it's just the thing that I love about anytime I get to interact with him, whether it be editing a podcast he's in or whether it be, talking to him, is he has an amazing vision for the world. I think his vision about of how to use it and sort of like the positives of it is something that you don't always see everywhere. And I think that as someone who has actually designed a car, using it, that created some new systems that people weren't thinking of. It's great to see someone who can show you test use cases of where it's actually valuable. So I always love hearing from Dr. Medhi, and it's a pleasure to have him on season 3 of the Adapt podcast.
Totally.
All right. Well, Danette, Dr. Medhi's not the only person that can sort of talk to you about adapting. People from the audience can do it as well, and they can do it by emailing adaptwithdanette@gmail.com. But to do that, let's look at our segment, Ask and Adapt. Alrighty, everybody. Welcome to Ask and Adapt, where you can email in questions that you might need help with in sort of this world that's constantly changing, and Danette can give you an adaptability lens to look at it through and hopefully help you out. As I mentioned before, you can email us at adaptwithdanette@gmail.com if you want to send in a question. And today we've got one from Ella Danette. So here's Ella's question that she's written in. Hey, Danette and Jez. Thanks for the shout out, Ella. Appreciate that. I love the topic of experimentation, even though I'm an accountant. When you have played around with experimentation, how did it go? Best, Ella.
Nice, Ella. I love this. So sometimes experimentation works, sometimes it doesn't. So I think, as an accountant as well, that we need to think about the fact that there will always be risk when we're experimenting, but also there's a risk of not experimenting because then we become stale. And our competitors are going to overtake us. So for me, it's like, okay, I ask myself a couple of questions around things like, what am I tolerating? How can I, and by tolerating, it's like, what am I putting up with? So is there a process I'm doing where I go, oh, every time I do it? That usually says to me it's ripe for a bit of experimenting and making perhaps a little bit more streamlined. And I think just having fun. So last week's episode, we spoke to Sophie Krantz, and she talked about being more playful. So, start with what you know in the areas that you know, and think about the things that maybe you or your stakeholders find more difficult, and think about how can we make them perhaps just better or easier or more streamlined. And know that you're not going to get it perfect. So, shipping at 80% is probably totally fine. And let's make it perfect, because you're never going to make it perfect anyway along the way. But it's better to have a little experiment, try it, decide whether you're going to ship it or not. Fail fast, as we'll talk about in our next week's episode. But ultimately, don't be okay with why we're doing it because we've always done it this way, which is a common phrase you hear in a lot of areas where they haven't looked to experiment or adapt for a long time. What about you, Jez?
Yeah, well, I think that sort of going off that theme of having fun, that's taken me to a different place that I wasn't expecting to go. But it's been a guide for me this year that's been really valuable because I think when you use it as a guide, but you use it in tandem with other things, it can be a really valuable skill set. So, for example, I wanted to work out more this year, and I've mentioned this on the Magical Learning podcast before, but I wanted to work out more this year, and I realized that I was not doing something that I'd fundamentally done when I was a coach, which is when I was a coach, I had a philosophy that if you can make people have fun doing the sport, then you don't have to coach them as much because what's happening is they're using their own time to practice. So you end up building like a passion. And if you can do that, then you're going to get people that are better skilled because they love playing the sport. So my job as coach was to make them have fun. Like what's the different ways you can have fun playing basketball? And so I applied that to my own workout. So I started basically looking at how could I do an ab workout that I would find fun, because I found that the reason I wasn't working out is because I just found it quite boring. And so what I started doing was I was like, what are sports that I like? Well, I like basketball. I like cricket. So I started doing workouts that sort of improved my skills in those areas. So for example, I have one that's basically I lie on my back and I've got a wooden fence in front of me that's sort of one post forward, one post back, and it's aligned like that. So it's a little pattern. And I'm basically on my back in a sort of crunch position, and I'm throwing the ball off different posts and going wider and wider. And it's basically forcing me to do little crunches. And I'm also working on my hand-eye coordination. But I could do that for so long. Whereas I could probably only do about, 10 sit-ups if I really tried. But I could do this for 20, 30 reps because my mind is thinking of something else. So I have definitely been guided by that concept of having fun. And I think if you can integrate it wherever you can, that's definitely going to help. But I think the other thing that I was going to say is that in the 2020s, experimentation, I think, is a must. And there's so many ways to experiment. And I think the thing is you got to have fun with it, knowing that it's not always going to work. Sometimes we release clips and they don't work. And sometimes you release clips and they do really well. You just have to understand that the ones that don't do well are just part of the system of creating ones that do well. So, anyway, I think it's a great question as well.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, again, from an accounting perspective, investing that time in experimentation is actually investing in your value and your worth because you're learning ways that things might work or not work rather than theoretically going, well, I'm not even going to try because it's probably not going to work. So it gives you good data, which actually makes you stronger and more valuable to your employer. Or if you're running your own business, you're learning as you go as well. So I really like when Medhi talked about that 15% time gave for one organisation a 30% increase in their profit. So it gave a return that they wouldn't have got had they not invested in that time. So, thinking about how she can actually create that time, whether it's daily or once a week, to actually value add for herself and experiment. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Danette, did you have anything you wanted to leave people with before we rounded out this episode?
So I think one of the things I really liked about this episode is that deliberateness. It's dealing in an area where a lot of people are quite unsure whether they can do it or not. Half the people he was saying are excited about AI, half the people aren't. That's a massive gap in organisation. So encouraging people to be able to experiment, to learn, to share what they're learning, whether it worked or not. I think they're great ways to set organisations up and our people up for success with AI. So fabulous episode for all of our listeners and viewers who've been sharing and commenting. Thank you so much. And don't forget to stay adaptable.